Good evening. I want to make sure that that's working okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ollie, for the introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you to Jan, who organized this event and had me coming down here. And thank you to everyone who is part of the Arapahoe Libraries. I just spent some time with the volunteers, and I have to say they were just a wonderful group to talk to. And it's just, obviously this is a library where people are very committed and very passionate about their books. And I'm really, really pleased to be here and be a part of that. And I'm so honored. And I'm so glad all of you are here. I'm really amazed at the crowd. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It's good to be here. So as Ollie said in the introduction, I am the author of 2 books. My first one is The Bookseller. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me and my books. And the first one is The Bookseller, which, has anybody read that one? A few people? Okay, yeah, I thought maybe. The book came out in 2015 from HarperCollins, and that was my debut novel. And I got to writing a little bit late in life, and got to publishing a little late in life, I should say. So, but that one came out about 3 years ago, and we'll be talking a little bit about that one tonight too. My second one is The Glass Forest. This came out in February. And so this is my newest book that's out right now, and we'll talk a little bit about both of those. When I do these talks, a lot of times I find people just sort of like to know about how writers become writers and what their journey looks like. So that's kind of where I'm going to start. And so I think you might have seen in some of the information about this that I call myself a designer a little bit too, and that's true. It's completely a hobby though. But I do think that there's a connection between writing and design. And so when I talk about my journey, a lot of times I talk about that, and I start with that connection. So I don't know if you can see that picture. It's very dark. My sister took it. This is the house that we grew up in, and that little window there, that little half window, was in a closet. And that closet was off my bedroom when I was a kid. And that was where I used to write. So I was one of those kids that wrote. So, sometimes people come to writing late in life. I was not one of those people. I was writing from the time I was a little kid, and I had this little side room off of my bedroom, and I had a typewriter in there. It was right above my parents' TV room, and they could hear me clamping away when they were watching TV. My dad would get mad if he was watching football, and he could hear me up there. But I had my books up there, and I had a little writing desk and a reading room. And this is my house. You can kind of see where the window is. They taught me how to do this, but I don't know. There it is. But that was the little window, and that was the room that I worked in, and this is our house that I grew up in New York, in northern Westchester, New York. So I was always writing as a kid, and it was something that I thought I wanted to do as a career. And then when I was in high school, I took some drafting and architecture classes, and I thought, oh, you know what, that's pretty cool too. I'm pretty excited about architecture. Maybe I want to be an architect. And you know how it is when you're a kid, and you think you're going to pick all kinds of different things you'll do. But I stayed with that passion, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to go to architecture school, and I'll be an architect, and this writing thing will sort of be my side gig because, nobody can ever make it as a writer anyway. So, at least I'll have this profession of being an architect. So I did that. I went to architecture school. This is where I went to school. And I went to architecture school for 2 years, and I loved every minute of it. It was really great, except that I kept sneaking off to the English department and taking creative writing electives. And so I really enjoyed the design, and I really enjoyed learning about architecture and designing buildings, but I clearly wanted to do this, and I wanted to keep writing. And in the spring of my sophomore year of college, I had a creative writing professor who sat me down. And she said, look, I know you're an architecture major, and I don't know anything about your design skills or your passion for that. She said, but I have to tell you that whatever you do, don't stop writing because you're really good. And I mean, I was 20 years old, and it was one of the most validating things probably the most validating thing anyone had ever said to me. And I always like to share that story because I think a lot of us who are older, we forget how much our words mean to younger people. And so I like to share that story because if you know a younger person that has a talent or a passion for something, please tell them, because they don't always know, and they're not always so sure about how they're doing with something or whether what they're doing matters. And it really does make a difference for them to hear from people that are older that what they're doing is important and matters, and they're good at it. It was a life-changing moment. I ended up changing majors, changed schools, and I got an English degree. And so I went on for years and had a career as doing marketing writing and technical writing, and that's what I did as much as I could. And I kept writing on the side. I published a bunch of short stories. One of them was a Pushcart Prize nominee, which was a pretty cool moment. And I wrote a couple novels. The first one I wrote in my 20s, and it was completely a practice novel. I learned a lot about writing a full-length novel by writing that book, but it's in a drawer right now, and there it shall stay. That's another story I always tell, and then I think about Harper Lee, and I'm like, man, I should burn that thing, because otherwise, one of these days, I'm going to get Alzheimer's, and somebody will find it, and they'll publish it, and they'll be like, wow, she wrote that, really? So you mark my words, go home and burn that. I'm telling my husband, we should go home and burn that. But it really was really good to work on that book, and I learned a lot doing that. And then I wrote another one when I was in my 30s, and that book was a good book. I worked on it for 7 years. I actually called it the 7-year novel because I really spent a lot of time on that book. And I workshopped it with some people here at Lighthouse Writers, and I pitched it to a couple agents, and I had a little bit of interest, but nothing ever went anywhere. And so, then I got married kind of late in life. I was 37 when I got married for the first time, and we had 3 kids in 4 years, and so writing just went straight out the window. There was no writing that went on for years and years. I did get back to design. This is the house that I used to live in, and I did a remodel on this house. I always like to show pictures of that house because I did a fix and flip on that house, and I did all the design work and a lot of the work on that house. And one of the things you might notice about that house is that the lines are very clean. Obviously, no one was living in it. This is a staged, before we sold it. But even when I was living in that house, I used to live in that house alone. It's a little bungalow up in Highlands. And even when I lived there alone, I kept that house pretty clean and pretty straight-lined. And that my writing and my design are similar in that way. I don't like clutter. I feel like in writing, there's a lot of clutter that you can cut out. Maybe not right in the beginning, but as you move along, and the same thing happens in design. This is my house, and so that's sort of the same thing. I designed that stained glass there. I didn't build it, but I designed it. And it's sort of the same thing. I try to keep most of the clutter out of the way. And so I was thinking about that a lot as I worked on my books. And I was doing some design work. I was doing some freelance writing. I was doing a lot of different things for a while my kids were young. And then this book came along. And what happened with this book is I really did have an aha moment. It had been, as I said, a long time since I'd done any writing of fiction, and because I had not had any creative ideas. I'd had a lot of fun doing some design work on my house and doing that fix and flip and doing some freelance technical writing and marketing pieces when they came along, and raising my kids, who were very young at the time. But I wasn't writing any fiction. And I really forgave myself for that because I felt like I didn't want to come down too hard on myself. And I thought, when the right idea for a book comes along, I'm going to know it. And that would be the time to get back to writing. So one day when I have 3 kids, and my older 2 are twins, and so my twins were in school. They were 6 years old, and they were at school, and my younger one was 3. And she and I were at the gym at the Schlesman Y up on Colorado and Yale. And she was in the childcare, and I was on the Stairmaster, and I'm doing my thing. And all of a sudden, I just had this moment where I was like, how can this be my life? It's a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, and I'm at the gym. I'm like, I'm not at a job. What am I doing here? I have a ranch house, and I have these kids, and I have a husband, and I have this whole life that happened really, really quickly. My life just changed. I got married, and I had these kids really quickly, and it just seemed like, really, for a moment, I felt like this could not possibly be my life. I used to live in that little house in Highlands, and I lived alone with my cat and my dog, and I wrote all night long, and I read all night long, and I did what I wanted. And that life went away really, really fast. And, I have no regrets about that. I have a great life, and even when my kids were 3 and 6, I had a great life. So it wasn't a thing of regret, but it was a thing of really feeling like, wow, life changed really quickly. And just in those couple seconds, I really sincerely doubted I belonged in my own life. I thought this can't possibly be real. And obviously the moment passed. So, but it gave me the idea for a book. And I thought, well, what would it be like if you were a person who started to doubt you belonged in your own life? And what if you continued to think that? And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. And what would make a person do that? So that was the seed of the idea for the Bookseller. And I thought, okay, now it's time to get back to writing fiction because this is a good idea and this is what I want to do. What I did find was that having a good idea and having the time to do it were two different things back then, especially with little kids. So I had this great idea and I thought, oh gosh, now I can get back to writing fiction. It's time. And I had no time because I had little kids and I had my freelance work and we were doing that redesign on our own house to make all those beautiful clean lines, and all that took all my time. So I had this great idea and then I wasn't doing any work on it, and it was so frustrating. And this went on for a few weeks. And then I ran across an article by Gretchen Rubin, who some of you might know. She wrote The Happiness Project and Better Than Before, and she writes a lot about managing your time and managing your priorities. And I came across this article by her, and she was talking about exercising. And she said that she was going to start exercising every single day for 15 minutes. No days off, no excuses, because she found that if she made 15 minutes for it every day, then she would do it. Whereas if she started playing these games with herself of like, well, I'll have an hour on Tuesday, so I'll do it then, but then if that hour doesn't work, then I can wait till Thursday. And, I think we all do that with some of the things that we want to get done because we feel like we need to have these perfect moments in order to get to it. And she said, you know what, sometimes it doesn't have to be perfect. You just do the best you can, but you keep doing it. And I thought, okay, I can apply that philosophy to writing. So I started writing 15 minutes a day, and no days off, no excuses. And I tell you, when you're writing a novel and you only have 15 minutes a day, you do not spend a lot of time with your thesaurus. You do not look for the perfect word or make every sentence great. You get some words down on a page. And I'm deliberately trying to talk slowly, but I do tend to talk kind of fast, and I write even faster. So luckily, I am able to write pretty fast. But there were a lot of days that I really did only get 15 minutes to write. But what I found was if you only have 15 minutes to write, you think you only have this amount of time to do these sorts of things, and you find you actually have more time. 15 minutes can turn into 30 minutes, can turn into 45 when we really make some time for ourselves. For instance, my little one at that time, she was 3, and she was getting some occupational therapy, and so this was right around that same time. And when she started seeing the occupational therapist, I would go to the office and she'd go into the appointment with her therapist, and I'd sit in the waiting room and read People magazine. And that, so then that was an hour, and I thought, well, that's kind of dumb. So I started bringing my laptop with me, and I would sit in the lobby of the office building where her OT was, and I got a whole hour that way. And it was a moment of time that I would have never thought of until you really realize you can find those moments if you're willing to not seek perfection, but seek good enough. And those moments do come along. Sometimes they were only 15. My husband knows the story I'm going to tell. He came home one day. We were in the middle of remodeling our house, and he brought a friend home to see the remodel. And it was in the middle of my 15 minutes, and I didn't know he was coming. And they come walking through the house, and he goes, we're doing this, we're doing that. And I went off on him. I was like, get out of here, it's my 15 minutes. And the poor friend was like, whoa, what's wrong with your wife? So he never did that again. He always knew when the 15 minutes were, and he never did that again. So I did finally get the book written, and I was lucky enough to have some time to get a first draft of that book done, and then I got to doing my very, very favorite part of writing books, which is research. I love research. I love research so much that I deliberately do not let myself research on the first draft of a book, because it's really, really fun, but it's a total rabbit hole. I mean, you start researching something and you're like, okay, I wonder if the, Ford Fairlane came in turquoise in 1960, and you go and look that up, and you spend 2 hours and you learn that, and you learn all kinds of other cool stuff, but then 2 hours have passed and you haven't written a word. So I don't do that in first drafts. In first drafts, I make a lot of guesses, and I take a lot of notes, and I just make it, as it's, again, getting to that 15 minutes, and you just kind of do the best you can. So that's what I did, and I hammered out a first draft of the Bookseller in about 6 months. And then my time started getting a little bit more because my kids were getting older, so I started having a little bit more time. So I got to get into this fun stuff of the research. And the Bookseller takes place, if you haven't read it yet, it takes place in Denver in 1962 to 63. And the main character is named Kitty Miller. She owns a bookstore with her best friend on what's now Old South Pearl Street. And she's 38 years old, she's never been married. And she starts having these dreams that she's got a whole different life where she's married, she's got kids, and they live in a big fancy house down in Southern Hills, and her bookstore is gone, and she's not speaking to her best friend anymore, and she has no idea why. So she does a little research, and she finds that, but for a missed moment, the dream life would have been her life. So that's what that book is about. So I had to do a lot of Denver research, which was really fun. Excuse me, I just got to grab some water. Which was way down there. The Denver research was great, and we're really lucky here to have a lot of resources. I spent a lot of time at the Denver Public Library at the Western History section, and I spent a lot of time doing things like looking at old maps like this and microfiche, which I loved. It was really, really fun, and just finding old pictures like these, which are very inspirational, just to see some of the things and the ways people lived. This was before my time, not too much before my time, but enough before my time, and I'm not a Denver native. So I had to spend a lot of time looking up and getting those details accurate and getting those details right. It was really, really fun to look at all those pieces of downtown. And of course, I brought in a little bit of the architecture. Kitty's husband in her dream life is an architect, so I had a lot of fun bringing in some mid-century architecture into that book as well. It was really, really fun to do that and see the different things that were going on at that time, especially in this city. Some of the pieces that I can't bring, I didn't put into this presentation because I don't have rights to use them, are things like Celebrity Lanes. There's a part of the book that takes place in the old Celebrity Lanes, which is where the Home Depot is in Glendale now. And when that book came out, I did an interview with Ryan Warner of Colorado Public Radio, and we were talking about that and all the things that were at Celebrity Lanes. There was a pool, and there was bowling, and all these things. And he said, it sounds a lot more fun than the Home Depot. I said, yeah, it really does. So I kind of missed that, and I had to imagine a lot of those things. But I really, really enjoyed that. That was a wonderful part of working on that book. Once I was done with all that, and I felt like I had a pretty solid draft, I went about the process of getting this book published, which if anybody has tried to do it, most of you know that it's not an easy process to do. I'm lucky to be involved at Lighthouse Writers in Denver, which is a wonderful organization for writers, and I've taken a lot of workshops and classes over there. And through them, I got to know a developmental editor. Her name is Shauna Kelly, and I hired her to edit the Bookseller. And I said, I really just need a high-level edit of this book. I need to know what I need to do if I want to sell this book, if I want an agent to pay attention to it and get this book sold to the big publishing houses. So Shauna read it, and she loved it, and she said, look, I think you're about 90% there, and I have a couple suggestions, and if you'd like to make them, I know some agents that I think would be interested in this book. And so I did, because you're not going to say no to that. And she was right, actually, about the things that she suggested, and that's how I met my agent. My agent pitched this book to 19 editors at the Big Five in New York, and HarperCollins bought it on a preempt, which means that they had more than one editor that wanted it. And when that happens, then instead of them fighting each other, the house just buys it, and you get to pick your editor, which it was actually harder than you would think because they were both really, really good. I talked to both of them on the phone, and then I went and made a list of pros and cons, except that there were no cons for either of them, so that was really tough. But I ended up just ultimately picking what I thought was the better fit for me, and the book published in 2015. It's done really well. It's been published in 18 other languages, which has been great. It did hit the New York Times bestseller list and the USA Today bestseller list. And it's a book club favorite. So if you're looking for a good book for your book club, I'm just going to throw it out there if you haven't read it yet. Because it talks a lot about those missed moments and those how our lives can go in different directions. And I think almost all of us have stories around that and how our lives can go in different ways. So I always suggest that book for book clubs for that reason. So once I was working on that, and that book was on its way, I went on to this one. And this is my recent book. This is The Glass Forest. I started writing this book when we were kind of in the publishing process for the Bookseller. Excuse me. I started writing it about 4 years ago, a little bit more than 4 years ago, and it was when we were in the middle of the process of getting the Bookseller out into the world. But I'd actually had the idea for this book a long time ago, before I had the idea for the Bookseller, but it's a very complicated plot. And I knew that I wasn't up to doing something like that when my kids were little. So it wasn't that I didn't have any ideas when they were little, it was just I didn't have something that I thought was viable. So I kind of thought about this book before that, and it had been around for a while in my head. I didn't know that it would be set as the Bookseller is in the 60s. But I ended up wanting to go back to that time period. And the reason is because of the social climate. When I wrote The Bookseller, that book originally was set in the present day. And I got about a quarter of the way into a first draft of that book, and I realized that the present day wasn't going to work for that story because it all hinges on sort of a missed moment. And without giving away what happens in the book, somebody doesn't show up somewhere they're supposed to be. And, we all know what we do when somebody doesn't show up, right? What do? You get on your phone, right? Where are you? You text, you call. We know what happens. So I knew that missed moment wouldn't have happened today. So I knew I needed to bring that book back to an earlier time. And the 60s ended up being a good fit. I loved, because I was like, I love the design, I love the cars and the clothes, it'll be so fun, and the music to write about that time. And it was, but as I did more research beyond sort of that decoration piece, I really got interested in a lot of the social pieces, particularly for women and women's lives, and the tough choices around work and family. And so when I finished that book, I knew that I really wasn't done, and that there were a lot more pieces around that time and around those issues that I wanted to explore. So The Glass Forest goes a little deeper into that. It is a three-way narrative. There are three main characters. The first one is named Angie Glass, and she is 21 years old. She is married to a man named Paul Glass. He's quite a bit older than her. And they're living in Angie's hometown in Wisconsin, in Door County, if anybody knows Door County. And they've just been married, and they have a baby boy, and Angie is blissfully happy. She just feels like she's hit the jackpot with this charming guy that she's married to. And then the phone rings one day, and it's Paul's niece, and her name is Ruby Glass. And she tells them that her father has committed suicide and her mother has run away. And so Paul and Angie drop everything, and they fly out to New York, because Ruby and her family live in a small town in upstate New York. It's funny, my publisher calls it upstate New York, but it's just an hour north of New York City. But I think if you're in New York City, like anything that's 5 miles outside of New York City is upstate. So I don't know. So it's not really upstate. But they go there to the town of Stonekill, which is a fictional town, to be with Ruby while she's going through this catastrophe in this time with her parents being out of the picture. And they get there, and Angie's expecting to mother this girl. She's only 4 years older than her, but she feels, well, she's a mother, and she's older, and she's going to be there. Her role is to take care of Ruby through this. But she finds that Ruby is a lot more mysterious than she had expected. She'd only met her once. Ruby came out for their wedding with her parents to Wisconsin, but that was the only time Angie had met her. And Ruby is very, very mysterious, and she does not warm up to Angie at all. And so Angie is really not sure what's going on, but we're getting chapters through Ruby's viewpoint. And so Ruby is dropping little clues about what might have happened in her family. And in the meantime, the backstory of the whole affair is being told through the viewpoint of Celia, and that's Ruby's mother, the missing woman. And her chapters start in 1942, which is when she met Ruby's father during World War II, and they go up through what becomes the present day of the fall of 1960. So it's kind of this three-way narrative, and I call this book a literary suspense, or another way that I term it is a why done it. And I like that term because it's not quite mystery, but it is. It's not like reading a conventional mystery where you're going along, and like, oh, you get to the end of the book and the butler did it. Oh my God, I never saw that coming. It's not like that. It builds and builds and builds, and it's based on character. It's based on people doing things because of who they are and because of the experiences they've had. That's what drives why the characters do what they do. And so it goes a lot deeper into sort of the psychology of the characters than a conventional mystery normally would. So it was a complicated book to write. It took a lot of learning about plot and pacing, which was really different than I had done in the in the Bookseller. And kind of having that three-way narrative was a little bit more work too than I had been used to working on. It took me 2.5 years to write this book, to get it the way that I wanted it. One of the pieces that I really enjoyed writing about with this book was Glass House, is the last name of the family is Glass, and they live in this house out in the woods, Celia and Henry's house and Ruby's, and it's this big, fancy, ultra-modern glass house sitting out in the woods in New York. So I had a lot of fun looking at and getting inspired by various glass houses that I saw. So there are some of them. This is just the one on the left is called the Philip Glass House, and it's a family. It's in New Canaan, Connecticut, and it is literally that family's name also is Glass. And then the other one I think is in Brazil. I'm not sure, but I found a lot of these kinds of pictures, and I found them really inspiring. And thinking about what their house would look like. Their house wasn't quite as open as this one, but a little bit. And when Angie goes there, she comes from this, living in this little tiny cottage in rural Wisconsin, and then she's stuck in a house like this, and she feels like she's in a fishbowl. So it's a very unnerving experience. It sounds really cool in theory until you do it, and you're living like that. So in my memory, there were houses like that in Westchester County, which is where the story is set, in New York. I didn't know anyone. I grew up there, but I didn't know anyone who'd grown up in a house like that. But I felt like there were houses like that. So there was a point where I went out there and I just drove around those roads, those little country roads where there are all these winding roads through the woods, and the woods are really, really thick out there because they've been there forever. So, and I found some, and I did not take any pictures of them because, they're people's houses. So, so you're not going to see any of those, but they are there, and I was right. There were definitely a lot of houses like that are out there, so it was inspiring to see that. Again, the research was a lot of fun for this book. This is the alcove, and this is in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where the character of Celia is from. Ruby's mother. So she grows up here, and this, I needed her to be, for some reasons of the story, I wanted her to be, again, remember, this is, in the 1940s, she's born in 1922. So I needed her to be a second-generation American. I wanted her to grow up in Brooklyn, and I wanted her, for reasons of the story, to not be Jewish and not be Catholic. And that ended up being a really kind of a tall order. So I had to do some research to find some ethnicity or some history for her. So I looked around and I found these Finnish socialists in Brooklyn, New York, and they built the first co-ops in the United States, and they're all in Sunset Park, New York. And this is the first one. It's called the Alku, which means the beginning in Finnish. And I ended up going there about 1.5 years ago, and because I wanted to see it. And so I looked online at real estate listings, and I found a unit in this building that was for sale. So I got in touch with the realtor, and I said, look, I'm not looking to buy a co-op in Brooklyn, but I'm writing a book that takes place there. Would you show me this unit? And he said, sure. And he ended up being like the greatest guy. We spent the whole afternoon over there, and he showed me the unit and, all around the building, and he showed me the basement where they would have their co-op meetings and the courtyard. And he ended up knowing everything about this whole neighborhood and these co-ops that had been, there's like 30 of them, and they're all still there. And they were they're all still co-op, and they were the first co-ops in the entire country. It's really cool. So that's one of those fun pieces of research that you get to find out, and it's just serendipitous, and you get to kind of hook up with really cool people when you're doing that. There's some other research pieces. Henry, the character of Henry, becomes sort of paranoid about communists, so he starts building a fallout shelter, and he also gets worried about crime, and he decides he's going to become a detective. And these are just some of the pieces that I found that went with that time period that I ended up picking up to get an authenticity on Henry. This is those ships. They're actually ships. You can't really tell, but let's see if I can do that. Yeah. So this is an aerial view of the Hudson River, and where I grew up is right about there. And where their fictional town, where Stoneco would be, is right about there, where there's not actually a town. But these ships that are sitting out there, when I was growing up there, this is called the Mothball Fleet, and they're non-commissioned. They're military ships that the Navy's not using anymore. And I moved there in 1972, and these things were gone by then, and I had no idea. And then I learned about this, and it was like kind of a big deal that they were there, and people were just used to seeing these things, and they're really eerie, just sitting out in the river, just docked out there in the river. I just thought that was really cool. So they actually do come up in the book. One of the things I learned from people that grew up in my hometown is that people used to take water skiing boats, and they'd water ski in and out between those ships, because there were no waves in there. So it was like dead calm in there, in between there. So they would go in there, and it was like water skiing on glass. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. So that actually does come up in the Glass Forest. You've got to read it and find that, but it's in there. This is the Hudson River. This is from the down by the water where I grew up in Peekskill, which is right up the river from there. And this is me. This is in North Bay, which is where Angie's from, in Door County. We have family friends who have a cottage there. So some of the fun parts about doing on-site research is you also kind of get to go on vacation. And this is a place that's very near and dear to my family, and it's kind of one of our happy places. We go there every summer and spend some time on North Bay. So when I was looking for a spot for Angie's home, it kind of made sense to make it there, because it's really idyllic and really beautiful. And I needed her to be from a small town that felt that way. If any of you have been there, you know that. And then I get, sometimes I get asked what's coming next. And as Ollie mentioned, there is that, which is coming up. So The Bookseller is going to be made into a movie starring Julia Roberts, and that has been in the works. The process of it has been in the works for a really long time, actually. She became interested in that book before it was even published, and it took a really, really long time to work out the details and the financing and all the pieces that go into that. And so for a long time, I couldn't tell anybody. I would go to these book clubs and talk about The Bookseller, and some of you might have been at those book clubs. And everybody would be like, if it was a movie, who do you think would star? And I'd be like, I don't know, who do you think would star? And then every now and then someone would say, well, what about Julia Roberts? And I'd say, oh, what a great idea. And then all this time I kind of knew that was going to happen, but we couldn't tell anybody until we really had a deal. And that happened about a year ago, that we were able to announce that deal. I have zero control over what's going on with that. They give me updates periodically, but if you're J.K. Rowling, you get to make the movie you want, but if you're Cynthia Swanson, debut author in Denver, Colorado, you hand over your project and hope for the best. So that it's been a really good exercise in letting go and letting it be what it's going to be. I trust her. I think she's great, and I'm really, really excited that she's going to do it. So we shall see how that goes. And I think somewhere my newsletter list was going around. If you haven't signed it, definitely sign it. That's probably the best way to stay up on what's happening with that. So I do talk about that and send out newsletters when there's any info. So that's happening. I've been doing a lot of events for the Glass Forest since I came out. I did some in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I'm going to be going to New York. I went down to the Tucson Festival of Books, which was great. And I've done a lot of events around here because the Denver community. I don't know if you guys know this, but we have an amazing, amazing literary community around here. There are a lot of readers in this area, more than in other places in the country. I mean, there's such a love of books here, such a love of books, such a love of writing, and such a dedication to authors and libraries. It just blows me away. So I've been able to do a lot of events. I have a few more coming up. They're on my website, and it's just always good to be out and be able to talk to people. So, as is this one. This one's lovely. And I am working on another book, and you can see that you can't read any of that writing. That's intentional. It's actually not even my writing. I just that's a free picture I pulled off of the internet. Because I don't write that way. I wish I could, but when I was pregnant with my twins, I got carpal tunnel syndrome, so I can't write by hand anymore, which is unfortunate. I can sign books, but that's about it. I wish I could. I used to really, really like writing that way. It was lovely, but I can't do it anymore, so everything is on the computer. But this is just to give you a little bit of idea. I am working on another book. I started it about a year ago, a little bit more than that. And I'm deeply involved in it, so involved sometimes that I kind of forget things about the other ones. I have a funny story about that. Jan, who helped organize this event, or really got me here, I met with her book club. This is almost 2 years ago, I think. And we were talking about the Bookseller. And we're having our discussion, and we're going on, and someone says, "Oh, the sister-in-law, I loved that character. What was her name again?" And I couldn't remember. I'm like, okay, I wrote that book, but I don't remember the character's name. And my excuse was, I said, I'm really deeply involved in another book right now. I'm really working hard on a new book. And so my mind is all wrapped around the new book. And that was The Glass Forest. And so I'm a little bit that way about the one I'm working on right now. It's set also in the 60s, a little bit further along. It's in the mid-60s. And so Vietnam is coming along, and it has some racial issues that the characters are dealing with. And so it's got a little bit of a level of conflicts that are not in the other two books. So I'm having a really good time with that. And I don't know, just stay tuned. That one's coming along. So that's mostly what I have to chat about. And I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any. Oh, come on, someone's got it. Yes. What does my writing space look like? Mostly I do write at home. I have an office, and it's not very big. It's got my computer. It's got a bunch of books. It looks out on my backyard. We have a very large yard. And it looks out on our garden, which is really great, and our chicken coops. So, I can look at the chickens, which I can't really see them, but I know they're out there. I write there a lot of the time, but if I get really, really tired of looking at those walls, I do write in coffee shops. I live in Wash Park, so a lot of times I'll go to, now you'll find me there. Now they'll know where she is. I like Wash Park, which is over on Emerson in Ohio in Wash Park. And what I like about that little coffee shop is along the back wall of it, you can stand up. There's a counter, and you can stand at it. And they also have artwork on the wall back there. Sometimes that artwork is done by students, which is really cool. So you have some nice things to look at, but you're not looking around. And you can kind of stand and then kind of sit down a little bit, so it gets me moving a little bit. So I get out a little bit. And then the other place I do like to write is we have a condo up in Fraser. And a lot of times I'll go up to Fraser by myself, especially during the week. And it's really, really, there's never anybody up there during the week. I mean, it's just dead quiet up there. And so I can get a lot done there. I actually just went up there this past weekend with a writer friend of mine. And I had never done that before. But she was desperate to get away and work on her book. And I needed to be working on mine too. So I asked her if she wanted to come up there. And we were both a little nervous. She's very chatty. And I thought, oh my God, what if she spends the whole time talking to me? But she didn't, and it really ended up working out well because we were both sort of just sitting at the table and sitting at our laptops, and she was doing, you could tell the other person was working, and we both got a huge amount done, and we both said it was one of the most productive writing sessions we'd ever had. So I think we'll do it again, and I don't know that it would work with everybody, but it did work really, really well with that particular friend of mine, that writer buddy. Yes? Have my children gotten the bug of writing? I have 3 kids. My twins are 13 now, and my younger one just turned 11. One of my twins loves to write. My daughter, who's my 11-year-old, loves to write. My twins are both boys. My other of my twins, it's like, pulling him to get him to write anything. He really does not like it at all. He does love to read. All 3 of my kids are voracious readers. So the 2 that like to write, I'm glad that they like to do it. And it's funny, the twin that likes to write, yesterday he came to us, my husband and I were making dinner, and he comes in the kitchen and he says, all right, I just decided to write a book, and I've written about 1.5 pages, and I found a plot hole. Can you help me, Mom? And I'm like, okay, sure. So we talked about it, and we figured out, how to solve the plot hole, and he's now decided that he wants to keep working on this book. He's written other stories, full-length stories. And then my daughter, who's 11, she writes shorter things, but she's wildly creative and fast, so she'll get some stuff done. But they all like to read a lot, and that's what I'm grateful for. Yep.
Following along the theme of children and the arts and reading, with the real movement
That's a really good question. So the question is, how do we get kids interested in the arts, especially when there's so much focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math? And I think I'm a pretty good person to answer that because I am a writer, and I have two very geeky, techie kids who are about to start high school, and they go to a STEM school. They go to Denver School of Science and Technology. So what we have found at DSST is that when they started 6th grade over there, they spend 2 hours a day on English language, and they're between the writing and the reading classes. And they do that over there on purpose, and they say, it doesn't matter how good your tech skills are if you can't communicate. And if you can't think critically about what you're reading and what material is in front of you. And I think that's a really good approach, whether it's a STEM school or any school, is to really sort of help them with their critical thinking and with how they're seeing their information, and to just question as they're going along. It's hard to incorporate the arts, especially any kind of actual physical art. They don't have that class anymore, and I really sort of miss that, where they're painting and they're drawing, and so they sort of have to do that on their own. And I think if kids are in a STEM school and they have that passion, our daughter's going to go to that STEM school, and she's much more artistic, and we've sort of talked about she's probably going to have to take art classes outside of school, because we do like the STEM education for her. But I think it is an important thing, no matter where your kids are, is to make sure that you're getting that well-rounded balance. And I think encouraging them to read and reading to them from the time they're young is always important. I think that kind of helps them get where books are just sort of normal, and especially physical books. I think are really, really important for kids is to have books around the house as much as possible. There's little free libraries all over the town. I don't know if there was much down here, but in Denver they're like everywhere, which is great. It's good to be able to just pick up a book and be able to read a book. And there's a lot of programs that are trying to get books out to kids that don't have them, and I'm really, really supportive of that and try to get involved in that as much as I can, because I just think besides Kindles are great and ebooks are great and they're convenient and all that, but just that physical thing of having art and music and books around, I think, is important for kids. Other questions? Yeah?
What brought you out to Denver?
What brought me out to Denver? I've been here for 25 years, and I actually lived in Boulder when I first moved to Colorado, and I moved here in what year is it? I moved here in 93, and I was living in Boston before that, which is not where I'm from, but I moved there after college, and I loved Boston. It was really, really fun. I was there for 5 years. And I was there, just sort of the right time. There was a lot of work there, and there were a lot of young people, and it was a really fun city. But I knew I didn't want to stay. Like, I could tell, like, it didn't really speak to my soul. It was just a good place to be. But in the summer before that, a friend and I road tripped across the country, and we came out here, and I really liked it. And I think I'm going to move to Colorado. And so I went back to Boston and saved my money and quit my job and drove out here and moved to Boulder. And that was when it was really easy to do that. I mean, there were jobs everywhere, and it was relatively cheap to move and relatively cheap to get around. So I really enjoyed that. I was there for 7 years, and then I moved down here because I was working down here and because I wanted to buy that little house in Highlands. So by that point, you could not buy real estate in Boulder, that's for sure. So even if I wanted to stay, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. Other questions? Yeah?
I have a question about connecting your architecture with your writing. Do you design your own book covers? And if so, how do you go about it?
So the question was whether I designed my own book covers, and if so, how do you go about that? I did not. I get input into them. I'm going to add that slide to my next presentation. Because with the Bookseller, actually, this was not the original cover, the one that it ended up with. There was another cover that they designed first, and there are some rare copies of that floating around. When they put out what's called an advanced review copy, an ARC, it had a different cover, and it sort of had like the spine of a book, and it showed these two women, one of them looking like Kitty and one of them looking like the dream Catherine, the other person, the other side of the life. And it was a very, very cool cover. And so that went out. We all loved it, and I kind of helped with the input and gave some thoughts about what I wanted that to look like. And then everybody liked it. And then about 3 months before the book came out, my agent called me, and she said, well, they're changing the cover of the book. And I said, okay, why are they doing that? And she said, because the head fiction buyer at Barnes & Noble doesn't like that cover. So we learned that if the head fiction buyer at Barnes & Noble doesn't like the cover of your book, even HarperCollins will go and make you a new cover. So that's how much clout that woman has. And she thought very firmly that it needed to show a book. And so they went back and they did this design, and it was the same designer, graphic designer, who did both covers, and he had read the book, so he knew the story. And by the time they told me this, they'd already designed this one. So I think they knew they had something waiting to show me. And if I'd hated it, they said that. They were like, if you hate it, we can keep the one that we have. But if you're okay with it, this is what we think we should do. And what I've learned in this process is that I tend to trust those people out in New York. I mean, they kind of, when it comes to marketing and it comes to getting books out, they know what they're doing. So if I'd hated this, that would have been one thing. But I didn't hate it. I thought it was kind of cool. It is striking in a bookstore, and that's why they wanted it. And so I was happy with it, and I ended up being happy with the way that it came out. For the Glass Forest, they gave me, I think, about 3 or 4 different designs that we looked at. It's funny, I showed them to my kids, and the one who's writing the book right now, he had one that he really, really liked, and he was really campaigning hard for that one. But I didn't like it as much. I felt like it looked kind of like every other thriller that was out there, and I really liked this one with the forest look in it and the kind of shadowy people down there. So it's somebody else designs it, but you get to give input and you get to say whether how you feel about it. So I think is how it usually goes if you're with a big publisher. Yep.
Like to work with an editor?
So the editor at my publishing house, you mean? So the question is, what's it like to work with an editor? Meaning my editor at the publishing house. I've had 2, and because the Bookseller was published by HarperCollins. And then in between the Bookseller coming out in hardcover and the paperback coming out, my editor left. So that was a little tough, and I didn't know it was going to happen. She ended up kind of technically retiring, I guess. I know she's doing some other things on the side, but basically she was kind of done. So they handed the project off to someone else. But when I was working with her before the book came out, she did very little editing. She was very happy with the book the way that it was. So there were not a whole lot of suggestions that she made to me. Most of the suggestions she made were fairly small. Excuse me. One of the things, though, that she suggested and that ended up leading to some wonderful relationships was the first time I talked to her on the phone, she said, I love that this character owns a bookstore. I think that's so cool. And, booksellers are going to love that, and librarians will love it, and readers will love it. Everyone will love that. She said, what made you do something so clever? And I said, I just kind of always wanted to own a bookstore, so I'm living vicariously through the character. But as we were going through the editing process, she said, I want you to get in as many details about owning a bookstore at that time as you possibly can. And she said, you've got some, you've done a really good job, you've got a good start, but get as many as you can. And I thought, well, who better to tell me that than Joyce Meskis, who used to own the Tattered? So I didn't know her, but I knew people that would know her. So I found a way to get in touch with her and through them, and she called me back after I'd gotten where I needed to contact her, and she was like, yeah, come on down. And so I went down to her office in the basement of the Colfax store and interviewed her, and I spent an hour talking to her, and she was lovely. I mean, she answered all my questions. And she introduced me to another woman named Sonia Ellingbo, who writes for the Littleton Independent. Some of you guys have probably read some of Sonia's stuff, and she's still around. So this was like 4 or 5 years ago now, and she was like in her early 80s then. So I think she's in her late 80s by now. But she used to own a little bookstore in downtown Littleton called the Book House. And that was Joyce's first job working in a bookstore, was working for Sonia Ellingbo in that little shop. So she got me in touch with Sonia, and I took her out to lunch and picked her brain about owning a bookstore in the 60s and 70s, and she was great. It was really sweet. We had such a good time. And then when the book came out, she took me out to lunch and wrote a little article about me for the Independent, which was those kinds of relationships are really, really great, and things get lead in from those questions like that from the editor. When we got around to the Glass Forest, I actually ended up changing publishing houses because of that, changing of editors, and just sort of losing my champion at HarperCollins. I didn't have a bad relationship with them. It's just that they couldn't find the right person to do the book. So you really want somebody who loves your book. This is one of the things I've learned, is that I've known a lot of writers who have ended up getting a contract, and they end up with an editor who's sort of lukewarm on their book, and you never want that. I mean, I always say it's kind of like dating. I mean, you know, who wants to date somebody where they're kind of lukewarm on you, right? You want them to be madly in love with you, and you really kind of feel that way about books too, and about your editor. They should be crazy about your book. So I ended up with Simon & Schuster and with an imprint there called Touchstone, and I have a wonderful, wonderful editor there named Tara Parsons. She's great. So I'm really happy there, and I hope I'll end up staying there. We'll see how it goes. And she had more suggestions for The Glass Forest. She did more editing than my editor at Harper did. It was she had some very, very insightful pieces of particularly the arc of the relationship between the two characters, Henry and Celia. She wanted to see that relationship more developed than I had had it developed. So that was a piece that I had to work really hard on. But other than that, that was kind of one of her main things, and then the rest of it was pretty small. Yes? Who do I like to read? I like to read a variety of writers and a variety of genres. I read a lot of this sort of level of literary thriller or whodunit. I do like, if I'm going to read anything that's mystery, I go a little bit deeper. I had some sheets out and they're around somewhere, I think they're over there, of book club reads. And so make sure you pick up one of those later of some of my favorite books. I like Leanne Moriarty a lot. She's one of my favorites. I think she's great. Who wrote Big Little Lies. I love Ann Patchett. She's one of my favorite authors. And let's see. Sometimes I'll read some nonfiction. I just finished reading Noah Trevor's biography, which was really great, called Born to Crime. So it's fun to get into some other genres as well. I'm in a book club, and I've been in my book club for 17 years. And none of my other members of my book club are writers, which is actually really great for me because they introduce me to books that I would not normally read, and I end up reading books where I'm not reading it to learn about it and to be, okay, you know, do I want to do what this writer did or do I not want to do what this writer did? Like a book like that. I mean, that was a book club book to read, Noah Trevor's book, or Trevor Noah's book, I'm sorry. And that was really good. I would not have picked that book up by myself, but it was really, really fascinating book about growing up in South Africa right after apartheid. Would never pick that book up. So I think that's one of the strengths of book clubs, is that, you know, other people are kind of picking your books, and I think it expands you. Yep.
I have 3 questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
Your professor, your life-changing
Mm-hmm.
professor, you still keep in touch with her, and what was her reaction to your book?
So the first question, out of 3 questions that we're going to get from the lady in the red scarf, is the life-changing professor that told me that I should keep writing. I have looked for her online because I lost touch with her, and I have not yet found her. She's not at the university where I was anymore, so I don't know where she is. And she has a fairly common name. Her name is Lynn Kramer. So if anybody knows anybody that taught creative writing at the University of Wisconsin in the 80s and is named Lynn Kramer, please come tell me, because I have not been able to find her. But I do periodically kind of look around and see if hopefully she's going to show up somewhere. So, because I would really definitely like to thank her for that life-changing moment.
As you're reading, is it hard for you? Does it ever ruin the?
Yeah, it does. My husband will tell you that. He's like, you don't like reading the way that you used to. So, and it's true. Books sort of, I read everything, not everything, but anything especially that's in genres that are similar to the way that I write. I hate to say it, but I read sometimes to like see, is this author going to mess up? You know, where is this going to derail for me? And it's really, really a bad habit. But I tend to do it, and I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I do find that there are a lot of books that especially by authors that have been around for a long time, and I don't know if it's just you get burned out or what happens, but I think it's kind of rare to make like your most amazing book be like your 15th book. Maybe people burn out by then. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't think I'm going to get to 15, so I can safely say that. But yeah, I do think that sometimes there's a lot of books that derail, and it does kind of it does ruin it for me. I also don't finish books anymore. I give it about 50 pages, and if I'm not into it, I just let it go. And I even do that with book clubs books. I used to at least finish the book club books. And now I just don't. I mean, there's too many books and so little time. And so I just give myself permission, and I give anybody permission. I mean, you don't owe that to the author. They they're going to find their fans wherever they find their fans, because there are definitely books that I thought derailed that other people loved. So it's very subjective, and but I do think there's just so many books out there and so many opportunities that find what you love and keep reading that. Okay, question 3. And then we're done.
I'm sure it didn't feel this way for you, but given the experiences of other people I've known that have tried to be published,
Mhm.
it would seem to be pretty straightforward and miraculous for you. And obviously, it's a great book. So, but I wonder if what your experience is with e-publishing or people in your community that have maybe tried that, or if the potential of pursuing that as you were writing affected the way you wrote it, or now that it's in hard copy published, what your thought is on that whole.
So the question is really about the publishing process, and I think when you say e-publishing, you probably mean self-publishing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, and whether to go down that path as opposed to searching for an agent in a traditional publisher. The advice that I got when I really felt like I was pretty done with the Bookseller, which is about when I met Shauna Kelly, my developmental editor, who introduced me to my agent. And Shauna told me, I took a query writing class with her, which is the pitch letter that you send to agents, because I didn't know how to do that. So I took a class at Lighthouse from her on how to do that. And she was an agent at one of the big agencies in New York, and then moved back here to raise a family and just freelance and teach. So, but she said, her advice was, she was like, look, if you think you want to do that, if you think you want to be published by the big publishers, then, go for the top. Start there and see what happens. And, query it as much as you can. Send it out. And if you're not getting anywhere, then you can look at small press. And if you're not getting anywhere with that, then there is always self-publishing as an option. But if you think you might want the top, you might as well try. And you're right. I mean, it doesn't always happen. But I do think that writing a really good query really helps. And it's funny, one of the things I've heard about queries is that you write this letter and it explains your book and it basically sells your book. And if it's really good, then that gets you an agent eventually, if your book's good too. And then the agent will use that and send it off to your editor because she thinks it's that good. And then if the editor thinks it's that good, that's what ends up on the back of the book. So all that jacket copy that you see, sometimes that gets written by authors and it really is based on their query letter, if they had a really good query letter, which I think is kind of a cool process to think about. But I do think, it's great that there's that opportunity. A lot of people just want to get a book out and they don't care how many they don't care about the distribution. That's the hard thing, is if you're self-published, the distribution is really, really tough, particularly with fiction. If you're writing nonfiction and you're somebody who does conferences on a topic and you're an expert and, you might as well buy my book when I'm done with my talk. That's one thing. But to write fiction and get it distributed, if you are not getting out into bookstores and into libraries, is really, really tough. It's a hustle. The people that I know that do it really enjoy it, most of them. If they don't enjoy it, they don't keep doing it. But I've known people who've published, numerous books, and they're like, I might only sell, a couple thousand copies, but that's okay. I'm perfectly happy with that, and I've gotten where I wanted to be. So, yeah.